idols. In a world of admiration and acclaim, where idols rise and leave a lasting name, we look to figures who inspire and enthrall, whose golden light seems to make us stand tall. Well, guess what? You worship them all. Behind the fame and the fortune you see, those idols are humans, just like you and me, with flaws and insecurities hidden from the sight. Behind the mask, they too fight their own fight. But there is only one worthy of worship and praise. He's the King of all kings, and to him I cast my gaze. This isn't just some phase, I will bow to him for all of my days. So no, I don't care what's relevant or about the new trend. This world around us will fade, and the God of the universe will be there in the end.
In a world of admiration and acclaim, where idols rise and leave a lasting name. Man, that's deep. But it does make me ask the question, what is classified as an idol? Well, here's what an idol is. An idol is anything worshipped in place of the one true God. Let me say that again. Anything worshipped in place of the one true God. And the story that we're going to be jumping in today is found in Daniel chapter 3. And in Daniel chapter 3, we see this king named King Nebuchadnezzar. Actually, on a count of 3, say Nebuchadnezzar all across the campuses. Ready? 1, 2, 3, Nebuchadnezzar. It's a long name, tough name, but he's a very important character in the story. And what we see from King Nebuchadnezzar is we see King Nebuchadnezzar create this huge idol, this huge image, this statue. And what he tells the people of ancient Babylon is that when they hear the music, to bow down and to worship this idol. Why is this important to us? Like why is this relevant to us? Well, you see, I believe that ancient Babylon and today, 2023 America, they have a lot of things in common. One being the worship of idols. You see, our idols, they might not look like this, but don't be fooled because we have idols as well. Idols like sex. You see, we talked about it a couple weeks ago that this world is driven by sex. With the things that you watch, the things that you hear, even the things that you are tempted to do, this world wants you to bow down and to worship the idol of sex, to give into the temptations of this world. Another idol that we have is the idol of money. That you need to go out and you need to accumulate the amount of wealth that you can. That you need to go out and you need to get your bag. That you need to go out and you need to gain as much money as you possibly can. That you need to bow down and worship this idol any means necessary. Another idol that we have is the idol of popularity. This idol is a tricky one because it wants you to bow down and worship this idol by becoming somebody that you're not. Another idol is the idol of sports, something that we often don't even see as an idol. And I know this was for my story. This was my idol growing up, that I committed as much time as I possibly could to the sport of basketball. You see, these are all idols that the world, that the enemy has set up. But the sad thing is that we chase after these idols. We bow down to these idols because we think it's the best thing that the world has to offer. They are idols that have been set up to rob you and distract you from the real joy and fulfillment that only God can offer. These things themselves, they're not bad. Like being wealthy, it's not bad. Being popular and well-liked, it's not bad. Having a relationship, it's not bad. Sex in the context of marriage, it's not bad. Giving 110% to your sport, it's not bad. See, all of these things and more, they become bad when you put them above God. They become bad when you try to find your fulfillment in these things rather than God, the only one that can bring true satisfaction in your life. And that's why I love this story that we're reading. I love this story because you see King Nebuchadnezzar, after he set up this idol, there was these men that came to him. And the Bible calls them astrologers. I call them tattletales. Because what happens is they come to King Nebuchadnezzar and they say, "Yo, king," probably not that, but that's my words for it. "Yo, king, there's these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They refuse to worship the idol that you have set up." And so what King Nebuchadnezzar does is he actually has Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego brought before him. And look what happens in chapter 3, starting with verse 13. It says, "Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, 'Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of music, fall down and worship the image I made. Very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?'" And so what we see in the story is we see Nebuchadnezzar bring these men and say, "Hey, I'm going to give you one more chance. I'm going to give you one more chance to bow down and worship the God that I have set up, to worship the idol that I have set up. But if you don't, well, then I'm going to have to throw you in this fiery furnace." And you see, this is what the enemy tries to do in our lives. He sets up this idol. He sets up idols all around, and he tells us that we need to bow down and we need to worship these things. He tempts us, and if the temptation doesn't work, then he threatens us. He may not threaten us with a fiery furnace, but he still threatens us. He threatens us with things like, well, if you don't go to that party, if you don't live your life like this, well, then you're going to lose all of your friends. Or, if you choose to be pure and you choose not to have sex, well, then you're going to be alone forever. You see, he threatens you. And hear me out, the threats, they can be scary. And it's easy to become fearful of these things actually happening in our lives. But the enemy's a deceiver and the enemy's a liar. And we serve a God who is good and has a great plan for our lives. That yes, there are threats from the enemy, but we have to follow after what God has for us, because in all reality, the enemy, he just wants to deceive you and he wants to continue to lie to you, when in reality, God has set up boundaries in our lives and says, hey, follow after me because I have an incredible plan in store for each and every one of you. And what I love about this story is that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they held on to this truth. You see, looking back, starting with verse 16, it says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand." And don't miss this, I love this. It says, but even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. And so we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have incredible amount of faith in this moment. And what is faith? And I want you to write this down. You see, faith is knowing that God can and believing that he will. Write that down. Faith is knowing that God can and believing that he will. You see, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had faith. They knew that God had the ability to save them from the fiery furnace. They knew he had the ability, and they believed that God was going to come through and save them. You see, for us, when the enemy threatens us, this is the posture that we need to have. That we know that God is able to deliver us from the enemy's threats. That we believe that, you know what, no, I'm not going to lose all my friends. Like, no, I'm not going to be alone my entire life. No, I'm not going to be broke and poor. Because I believe that God has the ability to deliver me from the enemy's hands. And then we need to follow it up with, but you know what? Even if he doesn't, I'm still going to choose to be obedient and faithful to God. Because God is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the only one that can satisfy my every need. And my worship doesn't depend on him coming through. My worship depends on who he is and what he's already done for me. God, I believe you're going to come through in my life. God, when I choose to be obedient, I believe you're going to bless that obedience and you're going to deliver me from the enemy's hands. But God, even if you don't, I'm still going to choose to serve you. And man, when we have this faith, when we're obedient to God, look what can happen. Verse 24, it says, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, 'Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?' They replied, 'Certainly, your majesty.' He said, 'Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of the God.'" Some believe this to be Jesus. Some believe this to be an angel. Verse 26, it says, "Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, 'Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here.' So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the people crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them." So what do you see? You see God delivering them from the fire. That while they were in fire, while they were actually in the midst of the enemy's threats, God was right beside them the entire time, making sure that they were going to be okay. And what I really love about this story is that these men, they had no clue how God was going to come through. No idea. But they didn't need to know. Because when putting your faith in God, it's not about the how, it's about the who. When putting your faith in God, it's not about the how, it's about the who. It's not about, God, how are you going to deliver me from this? God, what's your plan? No, that's not the posture we need to have. The posture we need to have is, God, you are the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. God, I have no idea how you're going to deliver me from the enemy's hands. I have no idea how you're going to deliver me from this fire. But God, I believe in you. I believe that you can. I believe that you will, because God, you are all powerful. You are all knowing. You are all loving, God, and you care so deeply about me. That's the God we serve. See, when we're put in situations like that our obedience to God has led to the enemy trying to threaten us, we no longer need to ask, God, how are you going to save me? All we need to know is who is going to save us. The King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Alpha and Omega, the one who loves you so much that sent Jesus to die a death that he didn't deserve so that you could live a life that you don't deserve. That's the God that we serve. And when we choose to be obedient, when we choose to follow after him, look what happens. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their own lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own." This is the king that mocked God. That in one moment, King Nebuchadnezzar was mocking God, and the next, he was praising him. What this shows me is that what the enemy means for evil, God turns it for your good and for his glory. What the enemy means for evil, God turns it for your good and for his glory. That you might be in a situation right now and you say, man, the enemy's attacking me. You might be in a situation right now that it doesn't look like there's a way out, but you have to remember the God that we serve. The God who holds all in his hands. And I have faith knowing that our God is unmatched. Our God is so much more powerful than the enemy that is attacking us. And what the enemy means for evil in our lives, God is going to take it and turn it for our good and more importantly, his glory. Listen, we have to remember and constantly remind ourselves that we're on the winning side. We're on the winning side. And that when we choose to be counterculture and to praise only God and to worship only God, life change happens. That when we go into our schools, when we choose to be obedient to him instead of bow down to what the world is trying to offer us. And listen, I know it's hard. But it's much easier when you're not doing it alone. And the people that are sitting around you right now, there's something inside of them that they no longer want to bow down to the world either. And when we choose to rise up together and to be counterculture, life change happens.